Welcome to Company Growth Partner. If you're new to this channel, my name is Matt Borka. I'm a media buyer and revenue operations specialist. I have an ad portfolio of $8 million. And I also have on the other side of the world here, Jayson.
Yeah, my name's Jayson. I am a digital marketing specialist, branding specialist living in Los Angeles, California. Matt's chatting with me from Bangkok, Thailand, believe it or not. Company growth partner, internationally operational, founded and run by Matt.
Yep.
You know a little bit about Matt. You know that Matt is into video games. You know Matt is from Hungary. You know that Matt defines Matt as a bit of a nerd.
To say the least.
We recently were discussing how Harry Potter has influenced the type of business person and leader that Matt is. So we thought we would dive into that in this regard for all of you to hear a little bit about how Harry Potter and the series has informed Matt and Matt's leadership style as an entrepreneur and as just an ethical business person. We often will talk about the way that you do business and how it is different from a lot of people I've met and that I've worked with. And we sometimes are unsure of what to call what you do and how you do what you do. And eventually we've sort of landed on the terms like ethical capitalism. We've eventually landed on this idea that Matt believes in and practices a version of capitalism that is ethical, that is about doing as much good as possible for the people that he works with and works for. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah. And I would also add to it because the way I do things, and I think we can both agree, I'm very unconventional in terms of leadership and how I think about business. My views on capitalism goes as far as long as I'm not going against what needs to be done for the other person, right? Whether it's a client or the people I work with, it was difficult for me to define what that is and where it comes from. I'm 31 and I decided to reread the Harry Potter books. And I just finished reading the fourth book. And that's kind of why we decided to have this conversation now.
You said earlier you were trying to describe this idea of being an ethical capitalist. And you said it's difficult to describe, but if you have a look at Dumbledore and the way that Dumbledore leads, it might make more sense, which I think is really like a useful way to say, like, you have learned a lot in terms of how you now lead from Dumbledore, a fictional character.
You know, the early foundations to everything that I'm doing, like it was because, you know, growing up, you know, I didn't really have like any like traditional leaders in my vicinity. So I didn't really have a role model. And I kind of knew from an early age that like, I want to do something with myself. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to have like a regular job or whatever. So I was naturally interested in a person like Dumbledore. And I looked up to the character a lot subconsciously. And now all these things are really coming back now that I have a business. And now it's kind of coming to the surface. Oh my God, a lot of the things that I learned from the book, it's something that I practice and preach every day.
Like a lot of us in our age bracket, you got into Harry Potter while you were growing up. I got into Harry Potter likely about the same age that you did. I was here in the United States. You were in Hungary. And you described getting into Harry Potter and the world that J.K. Rowling created as an escape for you in some respect.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Even at that age, I felt that there was something suboptimal about Hungarian culture. I didn't really know what it was. There was always like a lot of tension and pressure. And then I was 10. So I started reading Harry Potter. And then I was able to identify, I saw myself in Harry a lot of ways because sometimes I just felt like, okay, I want to get out of here type thing, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of interesting because that escapism turned into something very different later on once I learned more and more about the United States, because in a weird way, the United States became Hogwarts for me in a lot of ways. And it became kind of like this ultimate goal that, if I go there, if I'm part of that community, that culture, I'll be able to experience all these wonderful things about the world that I wouldn't be able to experience just by living in a small northeastern town in Hungary.
And now you're grown, and now you're operating a business that is a fully American business with American colleagues, with American clients. You are living the American dream in real time. I mean, you got to Hogwarts and now you're doing it. It's pretty cool.
For anyone who hasn't really seen like my posts on Instagram, so I managed to attend one of the first Alex Hormozi, Layla Hormozi acquisition.com workshops, right? And then, thinking back, I wasn't thinking about this at the time, but when I was there, because I was always more interested in the West Coast than the East Coast, right? That was my first time in places like Vegas and California. So in a sense, it was literally like going to Hogwarts. And again, like I wasn't thinking about that when I was there, but in a weird way, it was like that. And I know that maybe for some people, it's like, oh, well, I've been to Vegas a lot of times. But for me, it was kind of a big deal because I was super, super broke growing up. It's insanity. Like, I was able to go to Vegas and California and all these amazing places. So obviously, it was like a big deal for me. Yeah.
Yeah. You came to Los Angeles and we got to work together in person. It was exciting. I mean, all the way from Bangkok, Thailand to the West Coast of the United States, that is a journey from, like Harry Potter.
Yeah.
So if we were to just talk then about like how Harry Potter and the parallels for the series continued throughout your life, like it's fair to say, I think that you eventually started to recognize that the books, and especially the later books you've said to me, were becoming a source for you in terms of like how you wanted to define your core values as a leader. You were able to tie a lot of that to the series. And one example of that you offered me was and this is something I've seen you do in real time with all kinds of people, but you're very willing to give people second chances. And that's something that you say you could tie to the book a little bit.
I realized this very recently, right? But it's something that I've been doing for a long time, right? So a great example of this would be how Dumbledore hires people, right? In the books, there was a specific section where Hagrid got really upset because there was a reporter who kind of ratted out that he's half giant, right? And it was like a pretty big deal because the wizarding community hates giants because they are viewed as very aggressive beings and they're kind of like casted out. And if you're half giant, like, oh my God, like that's like really bad, right?
I forgot about this whole plot line.
Dumbledore didn't really care whether Hagrid was a half giant or not. Didn't matter. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Insert ethnicity, sexuality, whatever. Right?
Yeah.
But then, the point is like with second chances in particular, there were a lot of times in my life when I gave second chances to many people, clients, contractors, employees, and I always do that. And I don't care whether the person is from the United States or not. Mm-mm. For me, having an American business is important because like that's the ideology I have, but that doesn't mean necessarily that I would, cast out another person because that person is from another country. Like that's not how I operate, right? So that was like one thing that really stood out to me because it was something that I wasn't aware of. When I read the book, I'm like, oh my God, like that's how I am. Like that's how I act.
100%. And I love that you just brought up Dumbledore's relationship with Hagrid specifically, because one of the things that we talked about in preparation for this conversation was the fact that, and you were so great in getting ready to talk about this, that you pulled quotes from, you're talking now about this relationship Hagrid had with Dumbledore because Dumbledore was willing to hire Hagrid, even though there was this view about giants, and Hagrid was secretly a half giant.
Yeah, and not even giants. Like, Lupin was a werewolf, and a lot of
and he had
the
to hide
adults were
that.
against that. He always had a rebellious spirit as a leader, Dumbledore, and he was going against the rules and the conventional beliefs of society, and he was fighting for the people who needed help, and a lot of times that's how I view and I'm not saying this in a self-aggrandizing way. I'm just seeing myself in Dumbledore, and it's weird because I haven't read the books for a long time, and then it's kind of like it's weird how my own personality is kind of saying hi from the books.
Yeah,
that it's weird. Yeah,
and you always saw yourself, sort of in Harry. I think a lot of us did as kids or whatever. But now as a grown-up, revisiting the books, you're seeing yourself in characters like Dumbledore. And I think this could be
scary how much.
It's scary how much, but it's also inspiring, because part of Dumbledore's whole thing is how do you lead from a place of goodness, from a place of morality, like with a clear moral compass. So these quotes you brought for this conversation, I'll just read this one that you brought, that it's Hagrid, and he's talking to Harry, and he says, "You know what I'd love, Harry? I'd love for you to win. I really would. It's show 'em all. You don't have to be pure blood to do it. You don't have to be ashamed of what you are. It's show 'em Dumbledore's the one who's got it right, letting anyone in as long as they can do magic." To the point that Hagrid is saying to Harry, you could go out there, be an example to prove that Hagrid is okay to be working at this school, that Dumbledore was right to hire him, and that Dumbledore was right to allow students to go to that school who may have Muggle blood.
We tend to forget that, everyone has magic in them, right? Like, in the real world, that has, many different names, whether we're talking about skills or, business experience or some type of knowledge in, whatever it is, right? And as people, we can be very judgmental when there's someone who is maybe not like us as much, or we're not familiar with that person's culture or whatever it is, and we're casting these people out sometimes, and it's not fair, and it doesn't really matter like how we're looking at it and how far we've come. There's, when one big struggle ends, there's new things coming up from a societal standpoint. And I think it's really important for us to understand that everyone deserves a fair chance as long as they can do the work. And I think that's where it gets really interesting, because, I'm a big believer, if you cannot do the job, you shouldn't work for this company, right? Like, if you don't have talent, and if you're not capable of doing the work, I don't care where you're from, like out. But then I'm not going to hold your whatever city or ism or whatever against you, in terms of, whether you're from like a different country or sexuality or race. I don't care, right? I think that's, and a lot of this mentality that I have around like accepting people, it comes from the books, and I can really see it now as an adult.
That's cool. I mean, it's cool too to tie that back, this whole idea of Dumbledore allowing anybody into Hogwarts who can do magic, back to what you were saying earlier about early on seeing Hogwarts as a parallel to the United States. And it's interesting to consider the fact that you with this aim to work in the American business sphere, have gotten there. You also have experienced some level of pushback simply because of the fact that, and we talk about this in other videos, you've experienced real pushback simply because you're working remotely from another country and because you were born in another country.
Yeah.
But that doesn't, detract from the fact that you can do the work and that the work is very much being done in American, business terms. Like we're working with American
Yeah.
clients on American business hours.
So yeah, like, I mean, in a weird way, I do feel like I'm being treated as a muggle born, quote unquote, because can I perform the magic? Absolutely. Would I argue that in some cases, and I would say I'm still very early in my career, I'm only 31, I can do the job better than the average person in the United States? I would argue in some cases the answer is yes. And even then, right, I'm still getting judged because, yeah, I mean, let's be honest here. This whole thing happens because people have an issue either with taking jobs overseas, and that has absolutely nothing to do with like what we do, right? Like there's other like political influences there. But then sometimes, a lot of times, overseas is being looked at as different. I don't know it. And, we talk about it a lot. Like, you tell me all the time that, like I come across as someone, very like worldly and
continental.
Yeah. And
yeah, you come across as an international person for sure.
But sometimes there's indirect suggestions that I should get paid less because I'm here, because why not? When the amount of work we do, right? Like that's something that we have to fight against all the time. It's a constant struggle because people think it's okay to pay us less, or they think they can get away with it. And then when we point it out, there's tension, or there's, oh, well, I thought.
Well, it's interesting to consider that those assumptions that we often do have to push back against, that those in our view are unethical, right? That's an unethical way to do business, to assume that because somebody is operating from another country that they deserve to be paid less than somebody who might be paid, that sort of thinking we would say is a version of leadership, a version of, capitalism that really is unethical, versus deciding that, anybody, like you were saying, who can do the work deserves a fair shake and deserves a fair pay, deserves a fair shot, right? That it's all about,
exactly.
You believe in a true meritocracy.
I mean, exactly. And look, like I had this conversation a couple of times where, well, oh yeah, it'd be expensive to hire someone from the United States. I'm like, well, yeah, like you have to pay someone, right? But then here's where it gets interesting, right? Because let's say that we can do the work 10 times better than, let's say, the average person who would be hired in-house, because that happens. I mean, that's why people work with agencies, right?
Yeah.
There's still the assumption that we're going to be okay with less. And that's why that's fucked up.
That's unethical.
Right?
In my view.
Why should a person get paid less when the person can do the job, can actually do the job better than the average person on the market? So it's like, I don't know, man. There's something fishy there.
Well, and in prep for this, you pulled another quote that I love from the book, from the fourth book, which you said you're reading right now. You pulled this other quote, which I don't know who's saying it, but the quote is, this is Dumbledore. And the quote, we believe, and the quote is, differences of habit and language are nothing at all if our aims are identical and our hearts are open, which is like just a really great quote.
Oh, yeah. Ron got pissed off at Hermione saying, oh, yeah, you befriended the enemy when Hermione was going out with Crumb.
Oh, right.
But then in reality, we all know now, like, why it happened, right? Because obviously there was a romantic interest on his part. It's very important for us to understand that, like, if you really, truly break it down, there's no difference. Like, everyone wants to get paid fairly. Everyone wants to have a good job, or they want to have a business that makes money and that business helps the person achieve their goals. I mean, it doesn't really matter. And I think we can all learn a little bit from the Harry Potter series about acceptance, right? And acceptance in a way that it's not shoved down your throat, but it's just, presented the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it operates truly in like a meritocracy where it's, are you fighting for good? Are you doing good? If you are, then you just, I mean, it's beautiful. I think it's cool to then talk about how you've told me, I mean, you talked earlier about how you got into the Harry Potter series pretty young, but you've told me that it was young. You were like 10 years old, you said, when a friend of yours said that they noticed that you and Dumbledore were similar in terms of how you looked at power.
Yeah, that was like really creepy. It was a random conversation that I just cannot, it's very difficult to unsee it or forget about it. Basically what happened was like we were just having a random conversation, and then, you know what, Matt, I envy you. I'm like, why? Like, because, and we were very young, like, you're seeking power not to abuse it, but to do good with it. And he was saying that because, I mean, it's weird when I'm thinking back, but I was always like that. Like, I always had, I was always very ambitious. I was always, my family always likes calling me a dreamer. But at the same time, I don't really think like the regular internet guru or online entrepreneur. So, and again, like, when I'm thinking about like, what are we going to do with all the money we're making? Well, I'm thinking about, starting other projects that require cash, projects that can actually help people, right? Like, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm not thinking about buying a fucking Lambo. I'm not thinking about, buying a big ass mansion, right? I'm thinking about like, one of the projects I had in mind, like starting an online school, which is kind of like, it's weird, right? Because we're talking about Hogwarts and whatever. But an online school for everyone, who want to learn like the way I did. Which obviously, like, it's going to require a lot of capital, and it's not something that we're going to be able to do like tomorrow. But it's a dream of mine to have, like, kind of like a Hogwarts, but online for all types of people to learn. And
Still, it's like a very useful parallel between you and Dumbledore. Like, you're interested not only in creating an online school, but you want that online school to be something that everyone, no matter what country they're in or whatever, could possibly learn from.
Yeah, that was always part of the vision, that, the only requirement is you have to know English. That's it.
It's like, yes, we all read Harry Potter maybe, and we all saw ourselves as Harry maybe. But now if you revisit the books as an adult, you might start to see, if you're operating like Matt is, you might start to see parallels between yourself and characters like Dumbledore, who is very interested in finding ways to lead and to wield his power from a place of goodness and, with a solid moral compass that's accepting and open. And when we were getting ready to have this conversation, you started to talk about how there was one flaw that Dumbledore had, which was that he was too power hungry. And I'm admittedly, like, I'm a fan in that I read up through the fourth book and I saw the movies, obviously, but I haven't read all of the books yet. And there's a lot that goes on that I'm like, oh, right. So you started talking about how you said Dumbledore was likely too power hungry. And that got you talking about the Elder Wand, which then got us talking about your tattoo, which I think it would be interesting to talk about that. The fact that your only tattoo, you have one, and it's a symbol of the Deathly Hallows.
Yep. There you go.
And so, like, what is that symbol?
What is
so there it is, the symbol. The symbol of the Deathly Hallows, your one tattoo. It's It's cool. Like that's a useful pivot, I feel like, in terms of the story around that tattoo and what it means to you. And this tether to Dumbledore's flaw being that he might have been a little more power hungry than another character, right? Than Harry Potter. So it all comes full circle, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because, like we also saw Dumbledore as this, almighty, perfect character almost. And then, as the story progressed, we did find out a lot of things about Dumbledore. And, no, he was not perfect. Like there was like a whole other side to him. He did make massive mistakes. And, he wasn't very communicative regarding those mistakes. The symbol itself, to me, it's a very important symbol because at the end of the book, at the end of book 7, right, the Deathly Hallows, Harry decided to give up all the artifacts, I'm pretty sure, except for the invisibility cloak. Mm-hmm. And he actually broke the Elder Wand. So he wanted to ensure that no one else has access to that type of power. Yet, in a sense, he achieved the ultimate thing. He was the most powerful wizard because he had all 3 Deathly Hallows, right? So that basically made him the master of life and death. After having that power, he decided, in order to ensure that that power doesn't fall into the wrong hands in the future, he's going to stop the cycle, and he's going to braid the wand. And I was 19 when I got this tattoo, and the reason why I got it, like, I don't know why, but deep down, I always kind of knew that I'm going to get out of Hungary one way or another. I don't know if it was determination or just kind of like, I cannot see the future, obviously, but I want to have that tattoo there to remind me that no matter how successful I'm going to be, no matter how much money I'm going to have, I have to stay humble. And when it comes time to, give everything back, I need to do it. And it's kind of like a daily reminder to me that, and I've had this, I'm going to have to redo it because it's getting a little faded. But again, I want the same design when I want to make it look a little cooler. But yeah, it's really a daily reminder to stay humble and stay true to the values I learned from the books. And I can still remember my mom said, "Oh, you're going to regret it. You're going to regret it so much that you have a fucking Harry Potter tattoo." And I'm like, "Oh, you don't know half of it, Mom. You don't know half of it."
You've never regretted it, have you?
No. I always knew. I always knew that I'm going to tell stories like this in the future. I don't know how.
It's becoming like very internationally recognized, like folklore that we all have learned so much from, I think, collectively. And I think this is like a useful conversation in ways that those types of stories can be used to help teach us things like really what we're talking about are business ethics, the idea of being an entrepreneur who wants to do work from an ethical place, who wants to, maybe build a business, but not sacrifice your morality to do so. So I guess, like, would you offer any advice to any aspiring entrepreneurs who specifically maybe are making an effort to like lead ethically?
The moral of the story with what I learned from Harry Potter is that, in a sense, when you're running a business, everything comes at a cost, right? You put time in, right? You're taking time away from other things. But then when you're putting pressure on your margins, right? Because you're trying to have more for yourself, that also comes at the cost of other things. And for me, it's like, how far are you willing to go? And how much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice to have that fucking Lambo or mansion? Because guess what? You're taking that money out of the pockets of the people who helped you get there. And I think that's something, especially in the online world, where Like, you cannot tell me that every single entrepreneur who has a Lambo, who has a mansion, they got there because they were the only one. They were the only people that who had the knowledge and the expertise and the experience to do all the things necessary to make that much money. Huh. Interesting. So what you're telling me is you needed other people to get there. Well, guess what? If you don't reward them, they're not going to stick around. And I think one of the things that I'm realizing now as I'm having this conversation with you is that, everyone was extremely loyal to Dumbledore, right? And that's something that we talk about all the time. Mm-hmm. Something that, the relationship that we developed as well, where, you're doing this because it's important to you, right?
Yeah.
And that comes from because it's in line with your moral values. And, you're not the only person who told me these things. And again, like, a lot of the things that you can learn from the book, you cannot get it anywhere else. I haven't found anything that was able to replace the things I learned from Harry Potter.
You said earlier, you were like, before I had the Hormozis, before I had Gary Vee to teach me about doing, business and leading ethically, I had Dumbledore and I had the Harry Potter series and I had this story to sort of launch me into this way of thinking that was really just about how do I do business in a way that lifts everybody up as a whole, not just fills my own pockets. And I think if you're interested at all in learning more about what we do and how Matt does business, you should click the link in our bio. You should subscribe. You should watch the other videos. You'll learn a lot about...
Subscribe. Like.
Yeah, please. But whatever, if you're interested in business ethics, I think Matt can become a very useful resource like Dumbledore was for him, for you, to learn about how to do business ethically. I think that's why I like working with you, because you're an ethical business person.
Well, thank you, Jayson. And hopefully the content was eye-opening and inspirational.
Go read a book.
Yep.